Hi again, and today this is another video about the Fallout Wasteland Warfare miniatures game from Bethesda and Modifius. Today I'm going to be talking about the solo mode that allows you to play the game by yourself against an AI. It's very clever. I've played quite a few games so far against it. There's a number of AI specific scenarios in the rulebook, but I've used the AI in a couple of the actual proper scenarios as well. And while it's not perfect, it is very good. It gives you a decent challenge. It's unpredictable enough that you can't just game it. And it's also sort of clever in the way that it's designed, in that it will actually sort of, attempt to complete objectives. Again, with it, because I kind of struggled to find any real detail about this mode before I bought the game, that's why I thought I'd put a video together. Again, I'm not going to go into real detail, really delve into the different possibilities, but I'm going to give you an overview of roughly how it works, how you set the game up with the AI, and we'll take it from there. You'll need to sort out these tokens and enough of them to match the number of models that the AI force brings. You take the white numbered tokens, you randomize them face down, and then you allocate one to each of the units that you're going to be deploying. I'm just going to be deploying one model from each of these three units just for the sake of making this easier. Then with the other numbered tokens, you again shuffle those face down and you set them up where the instructions for the scenario instruct you to set up that particular force. So for this instance, I've just decided that everything's got to be within orange of this barricade, so I've sort of randomly picked a location for where I want the three models to start. So we find the token number 1 and look for the number 1, that is the mutant hound. So we take the mutant hound, if I can manage to grab it with my dodgy hand, and we set him up on the table over by the number 1 token, and then we remove the number 1 token. Once that's done, that's the AI force deployed, and we still keep the numbered tokens here to identify the models, because we will then be using these tokens to determine which order that they actually get activated in. So with the game ready to go, you flip over one of the AI tokens, again done it off camera because of my hand, and we flipped over the first token, and that's number 3. So that means that you consult the tokens and you've allocated number 3 to the super mutant, so he's the one that's going to get activated on that turn. And the first thing that you do is that you roll this blue die, and depending on whatever you roll, that will determine, it goes part towards determining the behaviour of the AI, and you consult the AI card for the particular model. I've just got a couple of examples out because this kind of covers pretty much everything that you need to know. What you're looking for is, you look at the symbol. Again, the blue die has things like one Nuka-Cola symbol, the nucleus symbol, there's stars on there. I think the bottle and the star counts as just a single star. And if you look at down the left hand column on here, you can see that you've got the same symbols. And across the top, there's also a condition which has to be met as well. So you cross-reference them. The symbol on the right we'll get to in a minute. So what you would do is you would roll. So say we've rolled this nuclear symbol. If we were activating the aviator, we'd look at the row with the nuclear symbol. Now we would then check to see how much health the aviator still has. If he has 8 health, then we would look at this column. If he has 4 to 7 health, we look at the middle column. And if he has 1 to 3 health, we look at the right column. And there are 3 things to consider when looking at each of the boxes. So you have to consider what the letter is, and that, because that dictates the actual type of action they're going to take. Then you look at whether the cell is shaded or unshaded, and that determines whether the model acts recklessly or cautiously. And finally, you check to see whether the letter is underlined or not. And the underline, it changes the model's behaviour whether or not he's currently in base-to-base contact with another model. We'll sort of explain each one at a time. Firstly, we'll look at A, which is the attack action. Now, the attack action is the one where the column on the right is important as well, because the column on the right dictates what type of attack an AI is going to perform. If it's an Alpha icon, it's going to try to perform a melee attack. and if it is the target, that means that they're going to attempt to perform a ranged attack. Now, if the enemy obviously doesn't have a weapon of the type indicated, then you use the other one, but it can sort of affect its behavior. So when doing an attack action, there are a number of steps that you resolve, which are slightly different depending on whether it's melee or whether it's ranged. So first of all, we'll look at the steps when you resolve an attack action with a melee weapon. Step one of the attacks is close combat. So if you've got a model who's already in base-to-base contact, then they just perform a close combat action. Next is charge into engagement. With the aviator, for example, he has a charge distance of red. If he's within red of an enemy model, then he will charge into it. If line of sight is blocked, therefore preventing a charge, you can then do step 3, which is move into engagement. So as long as you can get to the enemy within distance of your move, which for the aviator is yellow, you will perform that step. With him being too far away to charge or to move into engagement, he would then attempt to move to within charge distance. Again, the red being the charge distance, he's over here, so he would just perform a move action to get within distance, ready to charge on his next action. If, as in this example, the enemy is hidden by cover, so you can't be charged, and you can't move to within charge because he's still would be out of the way, he would instead do a move into move distance. So a single move to then put him somewhere where he'd be able to move towards the enemy. If the distance between the model you're activating and the target is just too great, you just perform a simple move towards the enemy. And finally, if there are no enemies to move towards, maybe you've killed them all, but the scenario still continues, you would then switch to perform an objective action instead. Moving on to the ranged attacks. So the first thing you'll try to do is shoot if you can. So you can sort the weapons table. Red range, for short range on this assault rifle. He's within red, so he would just attempt to shoot. If he can't shoot, then he will move so that he can shoot the next time he activates. So as you can see, this guy here, he's hidden behind this piece of cover. So this mutant would decide to move so that he would then be able to shoot on his next turn. However, the one proviso of this is that he's not allowed to move any closer than yellow from the target when doing this. Next up is if the target is too far away to shoot and too far away to move so that you can shoot, you just move towards the enemy and hopefully that will bring you closer towards him for the next turn. And again, if you can't do any of those actions, you would switch to an objective action instead. When choosing who's going to be the target of an AI attack, you have to consult this little table down in the bottom right corner of the AI card. There's a whole list of these conditions, these priorities in the rulebook. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but that is what you use. So if you've got multiple targets, then they will never necessarily attack the closest target to them unless that is the thing that's dictated on this card. They'll always go in the order of priority here. If you can't decide because of that order of priority, because it doesn't discern between particular units, then you can just get to pick. And finally, although not on this card, but the other thing to consider when doing an attack is if you have an attack action which has the grayed out box, then that refers to them acting recklessly. And performing a reckless attack, that means that the AI will consider an engaged enemy model to be a viable target. If it's a standard unshaded box, then that means that they will not consider engaged enemy target as viable. That's because shooting into melees and shooting at engaged models is risky. You could end up shooting your own people. The next action we'll discuss is the move action. This introduces another kind of concept, which is the subject. That's referred to in the rulebook a fair bit. Now the subject is whatever the objective is of the mission that you're currently playing. So if the objective is to destroy a certain piece of scenery, that piece of scenery is the subject. If it is to kill everybody, then other people are the subject. So you do a move action, and literally all it is you move towards the subject without engaging an enemy figure. That's it. The only difference between reckless shaded and the unshaded careful side is if you perform a reckless move action, you move in a straight line towards the subject. If you're performing a careful action, then they have to move at least half of their move distance, but must attempt, if possible, to stop in cover. If the AI is ever within their move distance of the subject, then they perform an objective action instead. The other variation of the move action is the F icon, which is the fall back icon. And what a fall back action is, that's essentially the AI making a decision that maybe moving forward isn't the best idea and maybe it should kind of take a more backwards position, maybe to defend something. And all it does is it performs a move action exactly the same as a standard move action, but rather than moving towards the subject, it will actually move back towards the initial position where it was deployed at the start of the battle. Again, reckless falling back goes in a straight line and ignores cover, and careful falling back, slightly different to the move action. If you do the fallback action and you do it carefully, the first thing that the enemy will do is try to shoot, if it's being careful and falling back. If it can't shoot, then you move along as far as possible and balance your end location with the place that gives you the most cover. Before we get on to the objective action, the only other one, it's not on either of the two cards I've pulled, it's the D for defend, and that is a defend action. And what happens with the defend action is to determine the target. It is an attack. The defend action is an attack action, but the way you determine who you're going to attack is that you look at where the subject is on the map, and then you perform an action to assess the target of your attack based on as if you were standing where the subject is. So if the objective was to loot a particular container, you would look at the enemy that is maybe the closest to that container and you'd attack it. If it would result in a target not being attacked or engaged, then instead you perform just a standard move action towards the subject. If you are doing a careful action when you're doing defend, if it is careful and the subject is engaged with the current target, then rather than shooting in close combat, which is a thing in Fallout, you will use your close combat skills instead. Finally, the underline that you see under some of the letters. So what this means is this just governs the AI behavior if it is engaged already at the start of its activation. So if the response letter's underlined, then basically what happens is if the model is in base-to-base contact with an enemy model, it'll stay in base-to-base contact and it will just perform an attack action. That's it. If the response is not underlined, that means that the AI will move away from the enemy model and out of base-to-base contact, and that will trigger reactions such as the enemy model getting a free action against it and whatever. But that isn't prevented, that is what actually happens. And that's pretty much it. All the AI get 2 actions, just like you do when you activate a model. So after choosing and performing one of the actions off the card, you don't re-roll the blue die, you always leave it to the same thing that you rolled before. But after completing the first action, all you do is you just consult the diagram again to see what they do for their second action. Once they're done, you flip over their activation token to the used side, and then it's your turn. Hopefully you found this useful, and yeah, I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.